Welcome, everyone. How's everybody doing? Good, great, awesome? Awesome? Come on, we can have some more excitement. It's a bright and sunny day. Spring has started, right? Once again, how are you doing? Good, great, or awesome? I can do with that. All right, so I'm Gaurav, and I've been with AWS for almost 6 years. And I've been leading this startup practice across Asia Pacific for the last 6 years. And what we do as part of this startup practice, I and my team, we work very closely with all the VCs, incubators, accelerators, startup ecosystem influencers, wherever they have portfolio of startups. And then we try add value to those portfolio companies by leveraging the best resources of Amazon. Now, when engaging with these startups, we do help them on the tech side, but we also trade notes with them in terms of what makes their businesses successful. So I'm going to draw some learnings from those engagements and also from some of the processes that we have within Amazon to talk about lean innovation and culture. But before we get started on that, let me just see who all do we have here with us in the audience. So with a quick show of hands, how many of you are from startups? Okay. How many of you are from developers or are developers? Well, this is the startups and developers track, so you should be raising your hand in either of the questions. Okay, how many of you are from the business side, like the sales or the CEOs? Okay, so rest are assuming from the tech side. So that's a good balance. Now, this is the startup and the developer track, and we'll have a lot of sessions through the day, more about the AWS technology, services, and all. But to begin with, we'll talk slightly more thought leadership. So this is going to tie into some of those Amazon perspectives, but you'd get enough of food for thought for the AWS services later on. Okay, and by the way, this is my first time with real-time translation, so I'm super excited, but I hope you do follow me through. Now, how many images you see on the screen that you recognize, but don't see much around? You can actually relate Korea Post instead of India Post. But what happened to them? They all got disrupted by new ideas solving the same problems, but through different paradigms. Disruption at this age was gradual, often taking like 10 years to unfold. Think of what happened to the rail transport industry with the automobiles and flights coming in. Think of what happened to the telephone industry with the onset of wireless mobile phones. They all got disrupted. Digitization has only accelerated the pace of disruption. Let's take the example of TV, cable, and broadcast industry. So on your left, you see some of these well-established companies in the TV and cable industry who were actually pushing the envelope on cable and satellite technology. But some of them failed to adapt to the changing consumer behavior, especially with the increasing internet penetration. But on your right, you see this company, Netflix. How many of you have used Netflix? Okay, how many of you have used Netflix DVD mail service, which was launched in the US? All right, some of you. So let me share a story here. In 1997, Netflix started off with this DVD mail service in the US. And it had vast range of these movie titles, which gave tough competition to all the local video stores. 10 years down the line, it added on a new service for movie streaming. And then it started observing the behavior of its consumers. 4 years down the line, it took a bold move. It actually separated out those two plans. And then it suddenly saw a lot of consumers move from high-margin DVD mail service to low-margin movie streaming service. Its profits fell by 90% in straight 9 months. However, with the low cost, a vast range of movie titles, and the convenience factor for the movie streaming service, it gained a lot more traction, and it never looked back. Similarly, if you think of Amazon, which started off as an online bookseller company, it started off with its Prime business, which gave tough competition to these players on the left. The point here is that disruption can come not only from your own industries, but also from some other industries. In this case, from a DVD mail service or an online bookseller. Let's take the example of hospitality industry. How many of you have used Airbnb here? Okay, quite a few. So Airbnb, as you could appreciate, started off with this small and budget hotel chains and also personal homes and started rising up the value chain. It started connecting the consumers and the producers in terms of the hospitality industry. Expedia, in a similar manner, was a lot more closer to the audience. It started reviewing all the consumer feedback and adapted its services more holistically. That helped them to be a lot more effective. And all these players that you see, well-established company on the left, they had a lot more expenditures and well-capitalized markets, but they were still left competing. So you could extend this kind of observation in almost any other industry that you can think of. Spotify, for example, it has been changing the way people consume music via subscription. Dropbox, it's been changing the way people store and save files. So it's as if the corporate landscape is being governed by these Darwinian survival principles. The well-established companies are no longer isolated from these technology disruptions. Here is another interesting slide from Inosight. It's an interesting curve, but the observation is even more startling. So it shows the average company lifespan on S&P 500 index gradually narrowed down from 61 years to 18 years in the last 50 years or so. So here's a clear warning for all the executives in this room. At this rate, 75% of the S&P 500 companies will be replaced by 2027. So where is the respite? Now, to be able to survive and thrive, you need to continue building new customer segments, new business models, and then trade the non-performing business models with these new ones. That's what we call creative destruction. So here's from the consulting gods themselves. And the notion here is that if you don't think of disrupting yourself, somebody else will do the honors for you. Think of what would have happened when Amazon started off with its Kindle's business. It would have cannibalized its online book-selling market for sure, but then this online ebook reading in itself became a very big market. Now, I suppose most of you either would have heard about Amazon or would have shopped on Amazon. How many of you know how the transition happened from Amazon to AWS? Let me share the perspective over here. So technology innovation has always driven the growth of Amazon.com. And as Amazon was adding more product offerings for its retail customers, it was also expanding into new customer segments. And after 10 years of building and operating this massively scaled web application, which is Amazon.com, it realized that it had developed core expertise in managing these massively scaled backend data centers. And that's when it started off on a much broader vision to serve a new class of customers, which is startups and developers. And it offered this platform of web services, which we all know as cloud or AWS today, to allow them to build these sophisticated web applications. So in 2006, we came up with this service called S3 to allow startups and developers to store their files on. Fast-track that by 12 years. Today, we have more than 165 services on the AWS platform. It's nearly a $30 billion run rate business, and we have millions of active customers every month. Now, when we speak with these customers and ask them, what's that single most important factor why they adopted the cloud? Guess what they say? It's not elasticity. It's not cost effectiveness. It's not even scalability. It's agility. Agility because cloud or AWS allows them to experiment a lot more and for a lot cheaper. So think about it. If you, in your company, come up with a new idea and you want to test it out, you could as well just spin up some set of servers, test out that idea. If it works, great, scale it up. If it doesn't, shut it down. Collateral damage, probably hundreds of dollars. That's it. So we've come to this new phase of accelerated disruption, which we call the AWS way or the cloud way, where we have moved from this old world of infrequent experimentation and high collateral damage to be able to do a lot more experiments without thinking about the failure cost. And that's what we call the phase of lean innovation. Now, if you have to think about the origin of lean as a concept, that stems from the manufacturing days, with Toyota coming up with its Toyota production system and doing just-in-time manufacturing of small and reliable cars, which gave GM a tough time, to then that concept of lean getting applied to all these services and processes industry, which includes hospitals and airlines and hotels, where the focus was to improve the customer service quality or to reduce the customer uncertainty. Think of the use of tokens in the banks to reduce the queues. And from there it evolved into this lean innovation phase, where it's a lot more pervasive concept which is applicable for not just the startups, but a lot more well-established companies and enterprises. The concept of think big, start small, scale fast. And that book you see there, the blue book, that's a must-read if you've not done so. Now you may say that it's easy to innovate and do all these lean, agile practices when you're small because you can control things around you. But then as you grow big, you get into a lot more bureaucracy. You get into a lot of red tape. You get into a lot of politics in your company. So how do you maintain that innovative or the startup DNA as you scale? Let's try and answer that with how Amazon does that at scale. So at Amazon, you could relate that we have been innovating with a lot more customer segments and a lot of different business ideas. And this is probably a fraction of what you would have also heard about. There's a lot more that we could put on the screen. Interesting thing here is that not all of them are successful all the time. We've had our own fair share of failures. But think about it. It just takes one successful experiment like AWS to reap for all the failed attempts. So when asked internally, how would you define this function of innovation? One of the smart engineers came up with this quirky formula. So don't take it at the face of it, but just pay attention to the components. So innovation is a function of organization times architecture, raise to the power mechanisms times culture. How cool is that? Let's dive deep into it. So when we are talking about organization, the first thing that you have to think about is splitting your teams into these cross-functional, single-threaded teams. And these teams should be able to deliver end-to-end. So if you are from a software or even from like semiconductor background in Korea, think of these single-threaded teams as owners of a specific feature of your product. And then that team could involve the architects who would define the scope of that feature, the developers who would code that feature, the testers who would verify, and the packaging team, or all through to the end. And then they'd be able to drive those specific metrics which are really important for just that specific feature. In Amazon, we also call that single-threaded team as two-pizza teams. How many of you have heard about this concept? Some of you. So again, the notion here is that if you're working late at night, and if you have to order pizzas for your team, and if two pizzas are not enough for your team, then probably you're too big as a team, and you need to split up. You're getting bogged down by too many details. It, of course, depends on your appetite. I agree. But you get the gist. Now, this got mainstream as a concept when it got captured by Dilbert. I'll let you read this on your own. Any engineers here? They're always funny. All right. So when you go to now Amazon.com, almost 250 services get triggered at the back end. And each of these services is being managed by a two-pizza team. And think of all of these two-pizza teams are iterating at once. and they focus on their specific metrics and performance. All of them are following all these lean principles and agile development practices. But when they work together, that's what drives faster innovation and more agility. If you're from the software world, you could correlate that to the architecture world, where the more loosely you couple your modules, the bigger they scale, the more fault tolerant, because there are less dependencies, and the faster you innovate. So that was more the base of that equation, organization times architecture. Let's look at the exponential part of that equation. Now, culture is the principal component in the speed of innovation, and mechanisms are some of those processes which will help you realize some of those cultural aspects. Airbnb, again, is a classic example here. So when Brian Chesky, the founder, was raising its Series C from Founders Fund from Peter Thiel, he invited Peter Thiel to his office, and he started showing him a lot of metrics and charts. And then midway during the conversation, he asked Peter Thiel, give me one single advice that I should focus on which will help me scale my business to the next level. And guess what Peter said? He said, don't mess with the culture. That's how important culture is. And that in turn intrigued Brian Chesky to write a blog where he called Culture is What Creates the Foundation for All Future Innovation. And think of what foundation is. It's the base, and everything emanates on top of that. Now in Amazon, we have our own culture defined by these 14 leadership principles. And I think these leadership principles is what makes Amazon a peculiar company. These are not aspirational leadership principles, which you may find at the back of the ID cards for some companies. This is what drives the behavior for us. We live and breathe these leadership principles. And it's applicable in almost everything that we do. Think of when we have to engage with the customers, we think about these leadership principles. When we have to prioritize between two projects, when we have to hire somebody or even promoting somebody, how that person has been performing on the leadership principles takes a lot more importance than his own performance goals. Let's take a few examples of these leadership principles. Customer obsession. We always start with the customer and work backwards. At least that's what we strive for. And when Jeff Bezos started Amazon.com, he set himself on this broad mission of creating the world's most customer-centric company. And we are still proud to be living that mission. Bias for action. Speed matters, especially when you're talking about reversible actions. And that's where you could also relate some of the concepts we touched upon earlier around two-beta teams and autonomous units. Invent and simplify. So if you're working on something and you're likely to get into or hit a hurdle, just work your way around it. Just invent and simplify for yourself and for others. And think big. We are always challenging ourselves to think blue ocean, to think out of the box. Now here's an example of product development at AWS. How do we go about it? Which gets deeper into the customer obsession principle, but also ties into the lean innovation concept. So when we have to release any product or any new feature, we always first start with a mock press release to capture the customer perspective. Now, if you read that mock press release, that'll have the specific product feature that we're launching, its value proposition. It'll also have some mock customer quotes, so it'll look almost real. It's just that we start from that and then work backwards. Now, then we release that to some of our friendly customers and internal staff. If nobody's asking any questions, that's a clear sign. And then we don't invest a single line of code or any resources in building that product. As simple as that. But if there are tough questions, that's a sign of interest. And that's when we get into our second step, which is coming up with this detailed FAQ to answer any questions a customer might have. That's when we get into the shoes of the customers, and that's where the customer obsession principle kicks in. And we think about what features should we prioritize for the customers? What would the customer really appreciate or pay for? All those kind of aspects. And internally, that helps us put a phase plan for the product release. And then thirdly, we go back, look at all that FAQ and perspectives from the customer's end, and then break our project into the different phases, which we can then launch in primitives or MVP, which is minimum viable products, if you know of, which can then be managed by the 2-pizza teams we talked about earlier. And then we launch and iterate fast and often based on the data and the traction metrics collected. Amazon is a very data-oriented company, and therefore this step is the most important. So if you have to club it all together, think of organization where we can have these cross-functional, end-to-end delivering teams, or the 2-pizza teams. In terms of architecture, think of having some of these automatable or repeatable modules that can help you scale a lot faster. In terms of culture, how would you incentivize your employees in the company so that they look up to certain leadership principles which drives the right culture for them? And in terms of mechanisms, think of all those processes that can help remove the friction and increase the team velocity. Now, when you truly combine all of that, that's what gives you the culture of lean innovation at scale. So as a closing thought, here's a very interesting quote that I like from Jeff Bezos. This kind of defines who we really are at Amazon. So I'll let you read. Customer first, invent, and be patient. And now that you know the secret sauce of how Amazon innovates at scale, the journey has just begun. Thank you.